Ever wonder what a presidential election could mean for, like, your tech stocks? We've had some listeners asking us to dive into how Nvidia might perform if, Kamala Harris actually takes the Oval Office.
Yeah, it's an interesting question for sure. And
Yeah.
we've got some pretty interesting analysis from the Motley Fool to kind of guide us through it.
Okay, so the Motley Fool, they're taking a close look at Harris's, proposed policies and whether they could be good or bad news for Nvidia.
Right, exactly. And it's particularly interesting when you consider how Nvidia stock has performed, since Harris became VP.
Wait, remind me, how much has it gone up?
It's up over 800%.
800%. Seriously. That's incredible. Although I'm guessing that has more to do with the explosion of AI and everything, not that Kamala Harris is suddenly a secret gamer.
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely the AI boom that's been the main driver there. Nvidia's GPUs are, powering a lot of it. But it does make you wonder, could that upward trend continue if Harris becomes president?
And that's what we're going to try to figure out today. But before we get into the specifics of all her proposed policies and everything, it's worth noting that Harris has a pretty comprehensive economic agenda, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot there. Tax cuts targeted at working families, trying to address those rising food costs, healthcare, the housing shortage. She's tackling a lot of different issues.
Yeah, no, and those are all super important issues, of course. But for this deep dive, I think we should probably, focus specifically on those policies that would have the most direct impact on a tech giant like Nvidia, right?
Exactly. I think that's the best approach. And the Motley Fool actually highlights 3 key areas that we should look at.
Okay, so let's hear it. What's the first area that the Motley Fool highlighted?
Well, they start by looking at Harris's proposal to raise the corporate tax rate.
Okay, and how much is she proposing?
So she's talking about raising it from 21% to 28%.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant jump. And I'm guessing, at first glance, that doesn't sound super great for companies like Nvidia, right?
Right. You'd think higher taxes, less profit, pretty straightforward. But it's actually a little more complicated than that. See, the Motley Fool, they dug into Nvidia's financials, and they found that Nvidia's effective tax rate over the past 4 years has actually been way lower than that 21% benchmark.
Oh, really? How much lower are we talking?
Well, in 2023, for example, their effective rate was only 4.5%.
Wow, 4.5%. That's practically nothing. So how are they doing that?
Well, it seems like Nvidia is really good at navigating the tax code, They utilize different strategies like using offshore subsidiaries, taking advantage of R&D tax credits, things like that. So even if this proposed hike happens, it doesn't necessarily mean Nvidia would end up actually paying that full 28%.
So the question is, can they keep up those financial maneuvers under a new administration that might have, stricter policies?
Exactly. It's going to be a game of cat and mouse, and I'm sure investors will be watching super closely to see how it all plays out.
Okay, so that's corporate taxes. What about Harris's stance on stock buybacks? I know that's another big one.
Right, she's proposed quadrupling the tax rate on those.
And Nvidia's been pretty big on buybacks, haven't they?
Huge. Last fiscal year alone, they spent almost $10 billion on buybacks. And they're on track to spend even more this year.
Wow. So this tax, if it goes through, that could really change things for them.
Potentially, yeah. If buybacks become a lot less financially attractive, Nvidia might have to switch up their strategy. Instead of focusing so much on giving back to shareholders through buybacks, they might increase dividends or, and this is important, reinvest more back into the business itself.
Interesting. So maybe less immediate return for shareholders, but then potentially, bigger long-term gains.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Okay, so we've got potential downsides with these tax proposals, but I feel like there was something in the Motley Fool article about a potential upside for Nvidia, too. Something about tax credits.
You're right. Harris has talked about offering tax credits for what she calls critical industries of the future. And she specifically mentioned AI and semiconductors.
Well, that sounds like it could be good for Nvidia, right?
It could be huge, especially if they're incentivizing investment in AI data centers and trying to boost the U.S. semiconductor industry.
But there's always a but, right?
There is. The problem is right now we don't have a lot of specifics. We don't know how much money we're talking about, what the eligibility requirements might be, nothing concrete.
So kind of impossible to say what the impact will be until we get those details?
Exactly. We're all just kind of waiting to see how it shakes out.
Okay, so big picture, it sounds like there are potential downsides, potential upsides, and then a bunch of question marks when it comes to, what a Harris presidency could actually mean for Nvidia.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's hard to say for sure what's going to happen, but I think the main thing to remember is that, even if Nvidia keeps doing well under a Harris administration, it's probably not going to be solely because of her policies, right?
Right. So if those tax credits are still up in the air and Nvidia might be able to navigate around that corporate tax hike, what is the main thing driving their future success?
Well, the same thing that's been driving it this whole time, AI. The demand for those GPUs isn't going away anytime soon.
Yeah, everyone wants a piece of that AI pie these days.
Exactly. And as long as, AI keeps advancing, Nvidia's hardware is going to be in high demand.
Makes sense. But, be honest. Are we really expecting another jump like that 800% growth we talked about?
Probably not. And it's important to keep in mind that was a different Nvidia back then, right? Smaller company, more room to grow. Trying to get that kind of growth now would be, I don't know, like trying to turn a cruise ship on a dime. Possible, but tricky.
So maybe temper our expectations a little bit.
Exactly. A 9 times return at this point, it's not super likely.
Okay, so maybe not becoming a $1 trillion company overnight, but overall, it sounds like their future still looks pretty bright.
Definitely. But like we've been talking about, you can never predict everything, right?
Right, all those global factors we touched on before. It's not like Nvidia's operating in a vacuum or anything.
Exactly. Competition from other countries,
yeah,
potential problems with supply chains, even just the overall global economy, those things all have a huge impact. Maybe even more than, who wins a single U.S. election.
That's a good point. No matter how much analysis we do, there are always going to be surprises.
Always.
Oh.
And that's why it's so important for investors to, stay informed, be ready to adapt and diversify.
Words to live by. Well, on that note, I think we've done a pretty good job diving deep into Nvidia's potential, under a potential Harris presidency.
Until next time, keep those questions coming.
And remember, we're here to help you make sense of the market one deep dive at a time.